you have any concern that your child may be suffering with depression? Are you seeing some signs, some symptoms that worry you that your child could be feeling depressed? Or do you have any concern that they might feel that way, feel depression in the future? If you do, I'm going to share some information with you here, which I think you'll find incredibly helpful and incredibly practical in such a way that I believe you'll be able to relate to it and understand it at a practical level. So as a parent, you'll be able to do something about it. You'll be able to be useful in your conversation with your child and help them to break that potential pattern in their mind. And even if you have a child that you're not concerned about it, this is something worth understanding, because you'll start to realize how easy it is for the human mind to slip into this depression state, particularly in the world we live in today. We're going to look at three things today during this video. One, what are the likely causes of depression for your child? Two, what are some of the things you need to be aware of? And three, how can you help? What are some of the things you can do to help? So let's get into that. Number one, what is the likely cause of depression in your child? Well, we live in a world today, or your children particularly live in a world today, where social media probably takes up a reasonable time in their day. And basically, depression comes in the most simplest form. I'm going to share with you what, from a human behaviors perspective, and this is the bit you're going to be able to relate to. Depression comes when we compare our lives to somebody else's, and we make somebody else's life better, more exciting, more successful than ours. It can be any area of life we compare ourselves to others, but in the most simplest form, just grasp this concept first of all. In the most simplest form, we look at somebody else in any area of life. It could be in beauty, attractiveness. It could be in vitality. It could be financially. It could be in a career. It could be in a partner they have. And anytime we look at somebody else and compare our life to theirs and make theirs better and say, oh, they're so much more successful than me. They're so much more clever than me. They have better friends than me. They're more attractive than me. Anytime we do that, we are putting that person on a pedestal. We're putting ourselves down in the pit, and we start to use our brain in that way, and that can start to create a different biochemistry in the body, and that can lead to feeling sad or depressed in that way. So imagine now with social media, how much your children are watching people promote their lives. Celebrities, friends, promote their lives, and they're promoting it in the best light. They're showing you the bits they want to show you, only the positive bits, the bits that are going well. Well, even though we know deep down, our intuition is telling us that's not their true life. Our intuition is telling us that actually, of course, they have a two-sided life, but they don't show that. And so what happens is our children start to compare and see this fantasy life from others and think, well, my life's not the same as that. Therefore, my life can't be successful. There's something wrong with me. There's something wrong with my life. I can never get to that. And the reason they can never get to it is because that is an unobtainable life. Don't be fooled, and don't let your children be fooled into believing that somebody lives this ideal life, this perfect life where everything is positive and never negative. That is not the reality. But if they start to believe that, then the living experience they have, where they realize in their own life they have positives and negatives, good and bads, happies and sads, when they experience their own life, they start to make their life wrong. Well, there isn't anybody in the world that, if they looked in that way, wouldn't start to feel depressed. Because if they think their own life of positives and negatives, happies and sads, goods and bads, they think there's something wrong with that because they're seeing other people's lives and thinking their lives are so much better. If they think there's something wrong with their life, why wouldn't you feel depressed? Of course you're going to feel depressed. So it's very, very important that we help our children to understand that is a fantasy life. That's not the truth. And if you go and do your own research on social media, and your own research on the internet, you'll be able to find that the people they're putting on a pedestal, there's probably another side to them. And the simplest way to understand this is if you said to your child or to anybody else, If you went up to them and said, said to me, Scott, you're always positive, you're never negative. You're always happy, you're never sad. You're always kind, you're never cruel. You're always cheerful, never miserable. You're always giving, you're never taking. If you said that to me, my brain would go, well, that's not true. Sometimes maybe, but that's not true most of the time. Equally, if you came up to me and said, Scott, you're always mean, you're never kind. You're always negative, you're never positive. You're always stingy, you're never generous. You're always taking, you're never giving. If you said that to me, I'd also go, well, that's not true also. But if you came up to me and said, Scott, sometimes you're positive, sometimes you're negative. Sometimes you're happy, sometimes you're sad. Sometimes you're giving, sometimes you're taking. Sometimes you're kind, sometimes you're cruel. I would feel with absolute certainty in my body, as absolutely you would, and everybody in the world would go, that's true. Because we all know that's the truth. We know we're two-sided. We know life is two-sided. And that's the truth, and that's the reality. But when we don't understand that, it's not we don't understand it, because actually we do understand it, because I bet all of you are going right now, yeah, that's true. But when we don't recognize it and embrace that, and instead we think we can have this idealistic fantasy fairy tale life of everything being amazing, when we think we can have that, you're going to feel depressed. So I hope that, first of all, for the first part, makes some sense to you. That we've got to help our children realize these are fantasy lives, they're not real. It's actually very normal to experience both sides of life. And actually, guess what? No matter how clever you think you become, how much studying you think you're going to come, how much personal development work you think you're going to do, and I've done over 30 years of it, no matter how much you're going to do, you're never going to change that reality of life. Just like a magnet has two sides, a positive end and a negative end. It doesn't matter how many times you cut that magnet in half thinking, I'll just keep cutting it so I can only have the positive end. Never going to happen. There'll always be a positive end and a negative end, just as there'll always be in life. So let's help our children understand that. The moment they understand that, the moment they grasp that and embrace that, they then can look at other people's lives for what they really are, realizing they're only promoting one side. And if they're people they know, they look a bit closer and actually see, well, actually, yeah, they do struggle in that part, or they have bad days there. Then they start to understand the true part of life. Now, I said the second part, things for you to be aware of. This is just my take from doing some research that I think is worth understanding. And this could be challenging for some people to get. The idea of depression is a label, okay? And what we've got to be careful of, this is the thing for you to be aware of, that children now own labels very quickly, okay? It becomes part of their identity. And this has been studied quite a bit. And I remember actually there was a report on the BBC website about Japan, whereas actually in the late 80s, early 90s in Japan, the word depression actually I don't even think existed in their vocabulary. And therefore, as you'd imagine, no word exists for it. They don't know how to feel that to some extent. They don't know how to recognize that. So in other words, it doesn't become part of their identity. But when you have a name for something, a label, you go, oh, I've got depression. You can now own that label. And owning that label can become part of your identity. And human beings will go do a lot to own their identity, to protect their identity. So if a child starts to think, I have depression or I am depressed, that can become a label they start to own. Now, the truth is, nobody is depressed 100% of the time. But if we own the label, we can start to actually think we are. Okay, now go back to the story in Japan. It wasn't until an advertising campaign, because companies like Prozac were struggling, antidepressant drug companies were struggling to sell anything in Japan. They were thinking of pulling out, until an advertising campaign actually called it the cold of the soul. And that was a way to get to the Japanese culture. And suddenly people in Japan thought, oh, maybe I have got it. And actually drug sales took off exponentially. And they actually said in this report, it got to the point where celebrities, newsreaders, TV stars, etc., started to say, I think I've got this thing called depression. And they started to have the label, and they described it in the articles. It almost became fashionable. Can you imagine that? Almost became fashionable to own that label. So the thing I want you to be aware of is actually, as I said earlier on, you're never going to have a life that's always positive, never negative. So therefore, it's actually perfectly normal to have moments of feeling a bit sad, moments of feeling a bit down, deflated. Okay? That's actually perfectly normal. In the same way you have moments where you feel quite happy and elated and excited. Actually, and neither of them, by the way, we'll cover this in another video, but neither of them are where you want to live. You want to live in the center, because in the center is where you're fulfilled, you're inspired, you're on purpose. When you're split either way, you're not. You're feeling strong emotions. Okay, so some people chase happiness. We can cover that another time. That's an illusion as well. We want to come back to the center, but let's stick with the concept or the topic of depression today. Be careful of your child adopting that label, because that can become part of their identity. If they suddenly say, I am a depressed person, or I have depression. You don't have depression. You do depression. You have to do something in your body to create that. So go back to what I was saying, that you have moments in your life where you feel sad and down and fed up, and you have moments where you feel happy. When you have those moments, let me ask you a question. Has the biochemistry in your body changed at that moment? And the answer is 100% yes. So if you come along to me when I'm feeling a bit down, a bit fed up, and you do a biochemical test analysis on me at that moment, you might say, Scott, you've got depression. You're depressed. Well, yeah, I'm feeling a bit down. But come back to me a little bit later when I'm kind of really focused on what I'm doing. I'm loving what I'm doing. I'm feeling inspired and enthusiastic to do that. Guess what? My biochemistry is completely different, and it changes in a heartbeat. Okay, so I want you to be aware. Point 2 is to be aware of, don't let your children attach to the labels, because that's not who they are 100% of the time. I'm not saying they don't have moments of feeling down, moments of feeling fed up, moments of feeling depressed, but don't let them own the identity of that. Make them aware that's not true 100% of the time. Catch them when you see them being enthusiastic about something, when you see them focused on something. Catch them that moment and make them realize their biochemistry in that moment is different. Third part, final part today. What can you as a parent do about it? Well, go back to the start. When we are comparing our lives to others, we're making that person's life better than ours in some way. We are almost trying to be that person. Our children want to be that person. They want to be who they are. And I want you to help your child understand the game of life is not to be second at somebody else. It's to be first at themselves. Be the winner of themselves. Don't come second to somebody else, trying to copy somebody else. Be the first, the winner of who they are. And get them to understand their own uniqueness. No two people on the planet are exactly the same. Even identical twins have differences. I talk to kids when I go into schools about their fingerprint. The pattern of their fingerprint, how it's different to every other person in the universe. 7.6 billion people now, whatever we are. Their fingerprint, nobody else has got the same one. That's only the start of their uniqueness. They may have things that are similar to other people. They may have interests that are comparable, but there'll always be a slight tweak. And I would encourage you, the thing you can do is help your child to understand their uniqueness and to honor their uniqueness and help that flourish and help that come out. And you can do that by beginning to understand their values. Again, something we'll cover in another topic in more detail, but very quickly, begin to notice what they have energy for. Begin to notice when they're enthusiastic for things, genuine enthusiasm, not excitement like we talked about earlier, not ecstatic, out of control excitement. Enthusiasm. Enthusiasm is when you can sustain something, keep doing it for a long period of time without needing motivation. You don't need motivation because you love doing it. Spot those things in your children. That's starting to tell you what is their uniqueness, what is true to them, what is their true identity is in that. What do they love to talk to you about? What is it they can't, some of you might think, well, they don't talk, but when they open up or you spot them talking to a friend, what is it they like to talk about a lot? because that again gives you an idea of what's important to them. So begin to recognize that in your children. Help them, give them a space, give them the opportunity to talk to you about what they love doing. No judgment. Say to them, look, I just want to understand what it is you love doing. What would you love to do with your life? What are the things that interest you? What are the things you want to learn about? Don't matter how random it is. Don't worry if it has nothing to do with school. Don't worry if it's nothing to do that your parents are involved in or any other family member. We don't mind how different it is, but we want to know what it is you love doing. What is it you're drawn to? And then as you start to find that, you start to give them permission to be themselves and come out of who they and be who they are. Then they're going to want to set goals around that. Encourage them with those goals. Help them find out more about what it is they love doing. And when they're doing that and they suddenly feel they've got that permission to be who they are and go after what they love doing, when they feel that permission to do that, they will stop comparing themselves to others, because they will suddenly feel more inspired and more fulfilled than they have ever felt in their life. And then they don't need to compare themselves to others. So they're the three things. That's the third thing. That last thing is what you can do as a parent to help them. Now, I hope that's been of use to you. As I say, maybe something you want to get your children to watch with you. I hope it's been of value. Please leave me any questions or comments below. Get in touch. And if you have anything else you want me to cover, let me know and I'll do my very best to answer your questions and come back with hopefully some more useful information. Thank you.